For 6 years, I drove my mother to every chemotherapy appointment. For 6 years, I managed her insurance claims, her prescription refills, her follow-up visits with 3 different specialists. For 6 years, I rearranged my entire life around a disease that didn't care about my career, my relationships, or the person I used to be before it arrived. My brother called on birthdays, sometimes holidays. Once, after a particularly bad round of treatment left my mother too weak to speak, I texted him a photo of her in the hospital bed, oxygen tube across her face, eyes closed. He replied with a heart emoji. That was it. Just a heart emoji. So, when the estate attorney cleared his throat and began reading my mother's will in a conference room that smelled like old carpet and recycled air, I already knew what was coming. I'd been telling myself for months that I didn't. But somewhere underneath all the hope I'd been carrying, I knew. My name is Catherine Webb. I was 39 years old when I learned that some things don't work the way you were raised to believe they should. My mother's name was Sylvia. She was 64 when she was first diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 3. The oncologist explained it carefully, using words that I wrote down on a yellow notepad because I could tell my mother wasn't absorbing any of them. She was too busy staring at the framed print on the wall behind his desk. One of those generic watercolor paintings of a lighthouse that offices hang when they want to feel calming. I don't think it worked on either of us. I was 33 at the time. I had a decent job doing project management for a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. I had a studio apartment I'd just started actually decorating after years of living, like I was still in college. I had a relationship with a man named, well, that part doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I had a life. A real one, with forward momentum and weekend plans, and the ordinary feeling that things were generally moving in the right direction. Then my mother got sick, and the momentum stopped. It didn't happen all at once. The first year, I managed it from a distance. She was in Cincinnati, about 100 miles away, and I made the drive every other weekend. I handled what I could by phone. Insurance authorizations, pharmacy coordination, the endless paperwork that cancer generates like a second disease running alongside the first. My brother, Philip, lived in Portland. He had been there for almost a decade, ever since he took a job at a tech company that had since made him comfortable enough that money was no longer something he talked about. He called more frequently in those early months. He sent flowers after her first surgery. He meant well. I believe that even now, but good intentions don't drive 100 miles to pick up a woman who's too nauseated to sit upright and take her to a blood draw at 7 in the morning. Good intentions don't sort through an insurance denial letter at 11 at night and figure out how to appeal it before the deadline. At some point, somewhere in the middle of year 2, I stopped waiting for Philip to show up and simply started doing everything myself. It was easier than hoping, easier than being disappointed again. By year 3, I had moved back to Cincinnati. I told myself it was temporary. I found remote work that paid less but allowed me flexibility. I set up a second bedroom in my mother's house. The house we grew up in, the one with the green shutters my father had painted the summer before he died. And I slept there more nights than I slept in my own apartment. Eventually, I gave up the apartment entirely. I kept a storage unit with my furniture in it for another year, paying $60 a month to avoid admitting what had actually happened to my life. Then I let that go too. My mother never asked me to do any of it. That's something people always seem to want to hear, as though the sacrifice is more noble if no one requested it. She didn't ask. She also didn't stop me. There were moments, sitting in the car in a hospital parking garage after a long appointment, both of us too tired to drive home yet, when she would reach over and put her hand on mine and say, "You didn't have to do this, Katie." And I would say, "I know, Mom." And then we'd sit there for a while in the dim yellow light of the garage, not needing to say anything else. Philip visited 3 times in 6 years. Once right after the diagnosis, when everything was still new and frightening enough that even distance couldn't hold him back. Once for Thanksgiving in year 4, which lasted 4 days and felt mostly like a visit. He was enduring rather than choosing. And once near the end, when it was clear the treatments had stopped working, and the doctors had shifted their language from fighting to comfort, he stayed 11 days that last time. He took my mother to her favorite diner for breakfast twice. He fixed a loose gutter that had been dripping onto the porch. He was kind to her, genuinely kind, and I tried to be grateful for that, and mostly succeeded. After he left, my mother watched his rental car pull out of the driveway and said, very quietly, "He's doing the best he can, you know." I didn't answer. I just went inside and did the dishes. She passed on a Tuesday in March. Snowdrops had come up in the front yard, the small white ones she planted along the walkway every fall when we were children because she said they were the bravest flowers, the ones willing to push through the ground while everyone else was still waiting for warmer weather. I was with her. I held her hand and told her I loved her and that everything was okay, even though I wasn't sure either of those things was entirely true in that moment. But I said them because they were what she needed to hear. The funeral was a week later. Neighbors brought casseroles. A woman from my mother's book club gave the most beautiful short speech about how Sylvia always finished reading the book, even when nobody else did. And somehow that story made the whole room laugh and cry at the same time, which I think my mother would have liked. Philip flew in the night before and stood beside me at the reception in his good blazer and told several people that it had been a hard road. He wasn't wrong. He just hadn't been on very much of it. 3 weeks after the funeral, we sat down with the estate attorney. The office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind with a lobby that tries too hard, marble floors, a fountain feature that wasn't running, gold lettering on the directory. The attorney's name was Mr. Dowell. He was precise and a little formal, the kind of person who never makes you feel hurried, but also never makes you feel entirely comfortable. He poured water from a glass pitcher. He asked if we needed a moment before he began. Philip said no. I said nothing. Mr. Dowell opened the folder. My mother's estate was modest but real. The house, paid off years ago after my father's life insurance came through. A savings account with just over $40,000. A small investment account through her former employer. She'd worked as an office manager for a pediatric practice for 22 years, and they had contributed to a retirement fund that had grown quietly on its own. A car. Some jewelry. The contents of the house, which included furniture I'd spent years reorganizing and a china cabinet that had belonged to her mother. Mr. Dowell read through each item. His voice was even and careful. The house, to Philip. The savings account, to Philip. The investment account, split, 70% to Philip, 30% to me. The car, to me. The jewelry, to be divided between us, at our discretion. I heard the words, I processed them. I watched Philip across the table and noticed that he wasn't quite meeting my eyes. His hands were flat on the table, very still the way hands get when a person is working hard to appear neutral. I looked at the water glass in front of me. Someone had left a small fingerprint on the rim. Mr. Dowell finished reading and set the document down. The room was quiet for exactly long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I reached into my bag and removed an envelope. White, letter-sized, sealed. I had been carrying it for 3 weeks since the day I'd found it in the nightstand drawer on my mother's side of the bed while going through her things. It had my name on the front in her handwriting. Below my name she had written, "Please give this to Mr. Dowell when the time is right." I slid it across the table. Mr. Dowell looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "She asked me to give you this," I said, after the will was read. Philip straightened in his chair. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said. "I haven't opened it." That was true. I had carried it for 3 weeks and I had not opened it. I'm not sure I can fully explain why, except that my mother had written when the time is right, and this felt like the time, and honoring the instruction felt more important than knowing what was inside. Mr. Dowell picked up a letter opener, careful and deliberate. He slit the envelope cleanly along the top. He unfolded the pages inside. There were 3 of them, handwritten in my mother's neat, slightly slanted cursive that I had known my entire life. He read silently for a moment. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes shifted. Then he began to read aloud. Katie, if you're hearing this in Mr. Dowell's office, then I'm gone. And I want to start by saying what I should have said out loud more often while I was still there to say it. I see everything you gave up. I seize all of it. Every appointment, every form, every night you slept in that small bedroom instead of your own home. I know what it cost you, and I need you to know that I know. Philip was very still across the table. The will you just heard reflects a decision I made carefully, and I want to explain it to you both. Philip, I love you. This is not a punishment. I hope you understand that before you read further. Mr. Dowell turned to the second page. Philip has never been good with responsibility. That isn't cruelty, it's just truth, and I've had a long time to sit with it. When your father was sick, Philip was the one who couldn't come. When the roof needed replacing, and I didn't know how to handle the contractor, I called Katie. When I needed someone to simply be here, it was Katie. The house and the money will give Philip stability. He needs it more than he knows. I am not giving him a reward. I am trying to give him a chance. Something shifted in Philip's face. His jaw moved slightly. He looked down at the table. But here is what the will does not say. My breath caught. 6 years ago, when Katie moved back to Cincinnati, I made a phone call to my attorney. Not Mr. Dowell, another attorney, Margaret Callison, who handles trust arrangements. I told her I wanted to do something that would take time to be right, and I asked her to help me do it quietly. Mr. Dowell cleared his throat and turned to the third page. There is a revocable living trust, established in 2018, that was funded gradually over the years that followed. It contains the proceeds from the sale of your grandmother's property in Kentucky. The farmland your Uncle Gerald sold on behalf of the family and forwarded to me as my portion of that estate. I never mentioned it because I never needed to touch it, and after a while I realized I was saving it for a specific purpose. That purpose is you. I couldn't speak. I wasn't sure I was breathing correctly. The trust passes outside of probate. It does not appear in the will. Its value, as of last year, is approximately $260,000, held in a combination of index funds and a money market account. The trustee is Margaret Callison. The sole beneficiaries is Catherine Ann Webb. The room did not explode with noise the way rooms do in movies. It got quieter, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that you feel pressing against your ears. Philip looked up slowly. His face had gone through several things in the span of about 4 seconds and had landed somewhere between shock and something rawer than that. Something I didn't have a name for but recognized. He looked like a person who had just understood something they had been avoiding understanding for a very long time. Mr. Dowell set the pages down and folded his hands on the table. Mrs. Webb, he said, I was not aware of this trust, but if the documentation is in order with Ms. Callison, it would have been structured precisely to operate independently of the estate. Your mother was within her rights, and it would be fully legally binding. I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. He continued. I would recommend contacting Miss Callison at your earliest convenience to begin the transfer process. Philip was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, 4 floors down, a city bus hissed past on the wet street. I didn't know, he said. Not to Mr. Dowell. To me. I know you didn't, I said. Katie, not right now, I said. Quietly, without anger. There was no anger in me at that moment. There wasn't room for it. The space was already filled with something else. Grief and relief and a kind of exhausted gratitude that I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. I picked up my mother's letter from the table and folded it carefully along the original creases. I put it back in the envelope. I held it in both hands for a moment, feeling the paper. She had noticed. All those drives, all those nights, all those Tuesday mornings at the oncology clinic with burned coffee in a paper cup, and the sound of the infusion machine, and the particular silence of a waiting room where everyone is scared. She had noticed every single one. There is a version of this story where I stood up in that conference room and said something meaningful, where I laid out everything I had given over 6 years and made sure everyone in that room understood the full accounting. But I didn't do that. I stood up. I thanked Mr. Dowell for his time, and I walked to the elevator. Philip caught up with me in the lobby, near the fountain that wasn't running. "I want to explain," he said, "about why I wasn't." "I know why," I said. "Portland is far. Your job is demanding. It was expensive and complicated, and there was always a reason. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I understand it. People make the choices that are easiest for them, and sometimes they don't realize what those choices cost until later." He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were red at the edges. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the first time in 6 years he had said those words in that order about this particular thing. I had not realized until that moment how much I needed to hear them. "I know," I said. "I believe you." We stood there in the lobby for another minute, the marble floor and the silent fountain and the gold letters on the directory, and then I hugged my brother. It wasn't a long hug or a healing one, exactly. It was just a real one. Two people acknowledging that something hard had happened, and that they were still standing on the same side of it. Then I walked out through the glass doors into the gray March afternoon. The drive home took 20 minutes. The snowdrops were still up along the front walkway of my mother's house. My house, I supposed, in the sense that I had been living in it and would need to figure out what came next. I sat in the car for a while after I turned the engine off, looking at those small white flowers pushing up through the cold ground. My mother used to say they were brave, because they didn't wait for perfect conditions. They just showed up when they were ready, whether the world was ready for them or not. I thought about that for a long time sitting there in the driveway. 6 years of showing up when I was needed, and sometimes when I wasn't. And sometimes when it cost me more than I had available. I had done it because she was my mother. I had done it because no one else was going to. I had done it because somewhere inside me was the part of a person that can't walk away from someone who needs them. And I had never quite managed to talk that part into being quieter. I hadn't done it for the money. I want to be clear about that. Whatever account Margaret Callison was holding in my name, that wasn't why I had driven those miles and filed those appeals and slept in that small bedroom for 6 years. But here is what I've come to understand, sitting in that driveway and in the weeks that followed. There is a difference between doing something for love and being unseen while you do it. I had assumed I was unseen. I had assumed that the silent accumulation of all those appointments and phone calls and evenings and early mornings had simply disappeared into the routine, unremarked and therefore unnoticed. My mother had been noticing the whole time. She just had her own way of saying so. Philip received the house, and the savings, and the larger portion of the investment account. I received a car and a trust fund built from farmland in Kentucky that I didn't know existed. We each received something the other couldn't fully see from where they were standing. Maybe that was the point. Maybe my mother, who had always been better at the long view than any of us, had arranged it so that both of her children would end up where they needed to be, even if the path there was uncomfortable. I don't know if Philip and I will be close. I think we will be something. Something honest, maybe, which is better than the careful politeness we'd been managing before. He called the following Sunday. We talked for 40 minutes, longer than we'd talked in years. He cried a little. So did I. We didn't solve anything. But we were honest, and that felt like somewhere to start. A month after that meeting in Mr. Dowell's office, I sat down with Margaret Callison in her office on the east side of Cincinnati. She was a small, brisk woman in her late 60s who had clearly known my mother well. There were photos on her desk from what looked like a charity luncheon, and my mother's face was in one of them, laughing at something out of frame. Margaret explained the trust structure, the asset allocation, the transfer timeline. She was efficient and kind. Before I left, I asked her when my mother had first called her to set this up. March of 2018, she said. About 3 months after you moved back to Cincinnati. 3 months. My mother had watched me give up my apartment and my job and my independence, and within 90 days, she had quietly, deliberately started building something to give back to me. Not out of guilt, I think, but out of love that understood itself clearly enough to plan ahead. I sat in my car outside Margaret's office, and I cried for about 10 minutes, the ugly kind that you can't really control. Then I dried my face and drove home. The snowdrops were gone by then. Spring had moved in fully, and the yard was showing the kind of green that only comes after a long winter, when the ground has had enough of holding everything in. My mother's hydrangeas were starting to come back along the side of the house. She had planted them the year my father died, because she said she needed something big and unruly, and a little excessive. Something that didn't apologize for how much space it took up. I stood at the edge of the yard and looked at all of it. The house with the green shutters, the hydrangeas, the empty window boxes she never got around to planting last spring, and I thought about what it meant to be trusted by someone. Really trusted. Not just with tasks or logistics or the mechanical management of a difficult situation. Trusted with the understanding that you will do right by things, that you will take care of what matters, that you are the kind of person someone can build something for without worrying that it will be wasted. My mother knew who I was. She had always known, and in the end, she found a way to tell me. An inheritance can be transferred. Trust is something you build, moment by moment, over years, through the small and unglamorous decisions no one is watching you make, until eventually the person who matters most looks at your whole life and sees every single one. That is what she left me. Not just the money, all of it.